This year's NFL draft class of defensive backs is particularly strong in that middle area. So the Chicago Bears should be able to find a cornerback or a safety they like with any of their day 3 draft picks.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. On the show today, we break down the cornerback and safety prospects in this NFL draft on day 2 when the Chicago Bears have their 3 draft picks, 2 in the second round, 1 in the third. We'll look at guys in each sort of area. First, the first round caliber players that maybe you hope could fall to the Bears at 39, and you would feel like you're getting a steal and a first-round caliber player if they last that far. Then we'll look at some of the more firm second-round guys that should be available with either of those second-round picks potentially, or maybe you trade down from one and still land somebody like that, some solid options in that spot. And then we'll look even more like the third round, or the second to third round range, a little bit lower down. If the Bears go elsewhere with their second-round picks, they might still be able to find something they can rely on with that third-round pick with some pretty good depth in this draft class. We did the same thing yesterday with the offensive line, and the day before that, we did it with the wide receivers. So if you want more of that draft coverage and you haven't heard those, please go back and take a listen to them. We'll start this one the same way we did with that. The players that are for sure out of the conversation, out of the question, not going to be there. Ahmad Sauce Gardner from Cincinnati, no chance. Derek Stingley from LSU, no chance. Trent McDuffie from Washington, probably no chance there. And then the safety, Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame, pretty clearly, I think, going to be the first safety and a top pick off the board there. Those 4 are for sure like the no chance, no way they fall to the Bears at 39 unless something crazy happens between now and draft day. Then there's a couple of guys that I think I would qualify as like pretty low chance of getting to 39, but never say never, depending on exactly how the NFL values some of these guys over others. And these, as with all these, it's not going to be my ranking them 1 through 4 and putting them in a specific order, but we're going to go at it from more of like tiers as we sort of go through this. So like, for example, Andrew Booth, the cornerback from Clemson, probably not going to be there at 39, but maybe he falls out of the first round, and all of a sudden you start to have a real conversation about it. He is a quick and explosive cornerback. It's really in the feet for him. He's able to recover really well. If someone starts to get some separation, he can really create or sort of remove that space with really great fluidity. He just moves so smoothly all across the field and gets there in a hurry. He gets up to speed quickly, not like the fastest cornerback, but just moves really, really well. And in that Clemson defense, it was definitely a very zone-heavy scheme, but he has that mobility and fluidity to be able to stick in man coverage. The problem with him is that he can be at times a little bit over-aggressive because he's so explosive, and that can lead him to be almost out of position in coverage because he just bites a little bit too quickly. And same thing kind of happens for him in run defense too, or even stepping up to make the tackle after the catch, where he's just so aggressive to try and come up into the ball that he can leave his feet and be over-aggressive in the tackle attempt and not just bring the guy down. So that's one of the things that could make him fall. The other thing too is that he had some kind of quad strain this offseason, didn't do the combine, hasn't been able to do the pro day, so he hasn't been involved in the workouts as much, so maybe there's a medical concern that could lead him to fall potentially a little bit there. The other cornerback in this range is probably a little bit below Booth, but not here to hierarchy them too much, is Kaiir Elam from Florida. Much more of the long frame, 6'1.5" cornerback, but he also ran a 4.39 40. Just a physical cornerback, at the line of scrimmage. He's going to press you with that length, jam you at the line of scrimmage, and make sure you're not getting a free release. But then he's much more of a zone cornerback in terms of like after he presses you, then he's going to drop back and kind of keep his eyes on the quarterback and read and react downhill a little bit more. Because I think in man coverage, he can be a little bit handsy. You know, he had a lot of penalties this past season that could need some room for quick picking up, and he just isn't quite processing quick enough. Sometimes he can be a little bit late, reacting to the route of the receiver in man coverage, and his timing on some of those breaks can also be off. So there's some room for improvement there, but he's got the length and the speed and the physicality and some of the zone skills that make him a potential first-round pick, but could also maybe help him fall more so into that Bears range. How about a couple of safeties? Both of these guys have been, I think, commonly mocked as first-round picks, but rarely do you see both mocked as first-round picks. So there's a chance that one of them falls into the second round and maybe down to where the Bears range. Let's start with Daxton Hill, the safety from Michigan, although he played the slot cornerback role almost exclusively in 2021. I mean, they'll move around a little bit, but he was more their slot cornerback. But he's played a bunch of different roles in that Michigan defense. This seems to be so often with defensive backs coming out of that scheme. So very versatile, but he's got really strong, elite speed, acceleration, range, and that's why he projects really well to be more of that safety, because you feel like he's got great anticipation in coverage downfield that he can kind of roam and range and get out on the deep halves or even the deep middle of the field and transition easily to that role where he's had some experience in college. Plus, he likes to hit and likes to be physical. The downside for him is that he's not the biggest or the longest or the strongest, right? He's not a length guy. He's not a thick, strong build of that's part of why they had him as a slot cornerback. He's not tiny. He's just average size, average length, average type of strength. And also, there were times where, at the catch point, he wasn't contesting as well as you might like, where he's contesting, he's there, he's tightly covering him, but he's not disrupting the actual catch. And you'd like to see him maybe get his hand in there a little bit better in terms of timing to actually break up the pass a little bit more. And those types of ball skills are some of the questions with him. Then there's also another really fast safety in this range, Lewis Cine from Georgia. That's C-I-N-E. Ran a 4.37. I mean, he is one of the fastest safeties in this draft. Really smart and savvy on the back end in coverage, takes really great angles, reads route concepts and quarterbacks really well, but then isn't afraid to be physical at the catch point too and really, create some contact there to disrupt that pass. And he's a pretty solid tackler. I think the knock on him is that he's a little bit lean. Again, he's fast and has some size, but not thick and strong there. It's a leaner frame. And in terms of ball skills, he's not getting his hands on a ton of passes. He'll hit the receiver and disrupt the catch point, but he's not really necessarily the playmaker in that exact sense. And not as tight in man coverage, much more like a great back end deep safety, read the zone and come downhill type of player that team could fall in love with in the first round, absolutely. Or if teams don't see him as the right scheme fit for them, maybe he could fall a little bit closer down to that Bears range. Those guys all seem like potential first-round talent that would be a steal for the Bears, potentially at 39, but more likely maybe they're not there. But still some pretty solid options for them firmly in the second round and even into the third round. We'll get to that next tier of defensive back prospects next on Locked On Bears. If you're following this NFL draft closely, you can use that draft knowledge for your bets with our friends at BetOnline. They've got NFL draft prop bets like you couldn't imagine. I mean, of course, the obvious ones like who's going to be the number one overall pick, number two pick, where's the quarterback's going to go, but also where certain positions are going to go, over under number of wide receivers in the first round, over under number of players from Georgia in the first round. A lot of different ways you can slice the NFL draft. And our friends at betonline.net are going to be your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports information, not just the NFL draft, but all the latest developments and league reviews, including this year's NBA playoffs just getting started, the Major League Baseball season underway, hockey playoffs coming up around the corner, plus golf, soccer, tennis, boxing, you name it, they have it at BetOnline. So head on over to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action you need to know. BetOnline, where the game starts. This second round is where you see a lot of defensive backs tend to be mocked to the Chicago Bears in mock drafts. And there's two in particular that I think we see more often than not at this position. One is the cornerback Tariq Woolen from UTSA. And it's no surprise that a lot of fans, and you might see a lot of teams fall in love with a prospect like Tariq Woolen because he's 6'4" at cornerback, but ran a 4.26 40, like the fastest time in the draft. We're talking like generational level of athlete. We haven't seen a player in NFL Combine history be that big and run that fast. It's straight line speed and its acceleration to 0 to 60. When you combine that with the length and the toughness that he has, I mean, that is traits for days that you feel like, okay, give me the freak athlete and I'll let my coaching staff turn him into a great cornerback. He also started college as a wide receiver and converted to cornerback. So he still has more experience to build at cornerback that you could see as potentially a higher ceiling there. Despite being a wide receiver, though, his ball skills are limited. That's part of why he switched to cornerback was because of his inability to consistently catch the ball. Dropped a lot of passes early in his college career. And so that has translated to cornerback not being able to come down with a ton of interceptions up to this point in his career. He's also missed some tackles. He's not a very disciplined tackler, which could maybe, again, come from having played wide receiver up to that point. But even just like in coverage, the technique is kind of all over the place a little bit. He's not very quick on his reads and sometimes can read it wrong. And he's still figuring out how to be a cornerback. He looked really good at the Senior Bowl and showed some real progress there, but this is a project of a draft pick, but so intriguing in the skills that is going to make him at least a second-round pick there that team is going to fall in love with and try and develop him into something that maybe he's not ready to start right away week one, but can get you pretty darn close and be a rotational player at first and really something special potentially down the line. He's been a common Bears mock draft pick because he's a fun prospect. The other one is at safety, Jalen Pitre from Baylor. And kind of like we talked about with Dax Hill earlier, like projecting him to safety in the NFL, but in that Baylor defense, he started as a linebacker when Matt Rule was there, and then now that Dave Aranda is there, he's sort of their slot cornerback. They call it like the star role. It's the fifth defensive back. You're kind of in the box. You're kind of a slot cornerback. They move you around a little bit. They blitz you a lot too. That was something Pitre was really good at, was getting, blitzing off the edge, getting around blocks and getting to either getting the quarterback or even, in run defense. He had a lot of tackles for losses too, where he would just come downhill and attack because he's a physical guy. He's a tackler. He likes to hit, and he's got that good like short area quickness, right? He can skirt around blockers, especially offensive linemen in space. He just kind of has a knack for slipping and dipping and moving in that short area quickness. I just wonder, as you project him, do you project him to be can he be a true deep safety in the NFL, or does he have to be more of like that slot box star type player? I mean, he's a little bit undersized overall. I mean, he's like 5'11" and not particularly bulky. Doesn't have like elite range on the back end. So, he's average, but not elite there. And sometimes in coverage, he can bite on routes a little bit and be a little bit too aggressive because he's got some of that quickness and that aggressiveness. But he's got the nose for the football and he's trying to get the ball, and you like that. But you do have to rein that in a little bit though. So like there's definitely a role for him in the NFL, and he's a starting caliber NFL defensive back, but it's got to be the right role, I think, in your scheme. I think the Bears absolutely could find that role for him, but not every team is going to have that vision for him, and so we'll kind of see where the market ends up leaving him there in terms of his draft prospects. Because like in the second round, it seems to be a little bit more of that type of underneath type box safety, because the other one in this range is Jaquan Brisker from Penn State. He's much more the bigger bodied, physical, strong safety. 6'1.5", 200 pounds, can kind of line up anywhere all over like the box. He's sort of almost like a dime linebacker, but can cover the slot a little bit and just be that physical, more like enforcer. Really, really strong instincts in run defense, knows his gaps and his responsibilities, and is able to sort of stay within the framework of the defense and make some plays there. He likes to hit, likes to find the ball, likes to be physical, but still can cover underneath, right? He's not as fluid of an athlete, and like when he's playing in the box so much, there's not a lot of tape and experience of him having to cover the deep stuff. So it's a different types of coverages he's asked to be underneath, more so than when you're playing the deep safety. So there might be some limitations there in terms of what you want to ask him to do in a too deep defense like the Chicago Bears run. And sometimes too, his eye discipline can be a little bit weak in terms of like he'll be caught not sometimes biting on play action, but also just like looking into the backfield and missing the receiver that runs behind him, right? Or even sometimes maybe a receiver that runs sort of near him because his eyes are in the backfield looking at the quarterback and not always feeling the plays around him. So there's some work to be done there. And he's not the fluid coverage guy, but if you want that box strong safety, Jaquan Brisker from Penn State, built that way, plays that like a linebacker, but at the safety position that a lot of teams can fall in love with and have a role for in their defense. I like the depth at cornerback a little bit better in this spot. And there's a couple other safeties we'll get to in a little bit that may end up being second-round guys that are in this second to third-round range. But these are more like the guys that feel like pretty firmly entrenched in this spot. Roger McCreary, the cornerback from Auburn, is another one that I think I've seen some recent mock drafts put him with the Chicago Bears. I'm interested to see like how that translates scheme-wise, though, because like at Auburn, he was the press man, really great at mirroring receivers one-on-one, fluid to kind of turn with them in and out of their breaks, disrupts the catch point, has pretty good ball skills, a lot of experience, ton of snaps in that Auburn defense in a lot of that press man-to-man coverage. The problem with McCreary is that I think he has the shortest arms of any cornerback in the draft, like T-Rex style, like not length. There's just no length in the NFL. And so there's some question then, if you don't have the length and you're a press cornerback in college, can you play press man on the outside in the NFL with short arms against big NFL wide receivers? Or is he a guy that's going to end up having to move in the slot just because he doesn't have that length to keep up? But he hasn't really played the slot at Auburn. So there's a little bit of a projection there as to how well he would play inside. But like there was enough of that floor that we saw from him at Auburn that you're like, oh man, like this looks like an experienced, solid NFL cornerback. But you know, how much stock do you put in the number of his arm length? Like if he's able to do it at a high level at Auburn with short arms, he might be able to do it at a high level in the NFL. It's just a little bit more of a question, right? It's not that he can't do it. It's maybe a hesitation to see if he is able to do it at the next level. And one other cornerback I'll throw in here, Kyler Gordon from Washington. Another one of these pretty solid athletes in terms of having like really good burst and fluid, like change of direction. He can move without losing a lot of speed. He can kind of go from side to side, left to right, just like strong, consistent footwork that you really love to see. Controls his body really well. It's just he's a smooth athlete operator on the field. And in that Washington defense, he played some slot, he played some outside cornerback. He's done a little bit of everything for them. He hasn't necessarily been a great tackler. And in terms of like reading and reacting in coverage, he's a little bit slow sometimes to process that, in terms of like passing off routes between him and his fellow defenders in coverage, or when to like jump a route and really take that route. It can just be a little bit slow for him. Not really great in press coverage either. So another one of these, like a little bit more of a projection. If you can get him up to speed a little bit more between the ears, he's got the movement skills, the fluidity, the enough speed and certainly enough explosiveness and change of direction ability that you can make that into something good if you can kind of hammer out some of the other details in terms of, reaction and reading and being in the tape and really understanding what the offense is trying to do to you. So like some options to like, there's some different flavors, some different sizes and speeds and different strengths and weaknesses. Clearly a step below some of the first round guys, but starting caliber players, absolutely. Like a lot of them you plug and play in week one. But I think even if the Bears waited till the third round or traded down from their second round pick, they can still get potentially a starting caliber defensive back in this draft at either cornerback or safety. We'll go through a couple of the other guys that might be a little bit later on, but still can offer you a lot to like next on Locked On Bears. Today's episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Shady Rays. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed and durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' Unreal Protection Program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They'll send you a brand new pair of sunglasses if you lose them, no matter what happened. You can give them a try, and if you don't love your Shady Rays, you'll pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, they donate 10 meals to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays. They've got a bunch of cool designs on their site. So something for everybody. I'm sure you'll find something to love. Exclusively for our Locked On listeners, you can head to shadyrays.com and use our promo code Locked On to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code Locked On for their best deal of the season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses. Backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. This draft class has a lot of different moving parts at defensive backs. And if you need to move some parts or get some parts moved to you, our friends at rockauto.com are the place to do it. They're a family business that have been serving auto parts customers online for over 20 years. They got everything you could possibly need for your vehicle. All the parts, I mean, it's unreal. So they have like easy stuff that I understand, like brake parts and tail lamps, motor oil, and like the complicated stuff that I let my mechanic work on, but fuel pump assemblies, engine control modules, and so much more. But even with everything to pick from, it's surprisingly easy to navigate. You just enter in your car's make and model, and then boom, brings up all the different parts, and you can sort between the brands, specifications, and prices you prefer. Those prices are particularly important because some of the chain stores in your town will have a different price tier if you're a professional mechanic versus a do-it-yourselfer like us. But rockauto.com's prices are the same for everybody. So don't spend up to twice as much for the same parts somewhere else. Head on over to rockauto.com today and see all the parts available for your car or truck. When you check out, write the word locked on in their box that says, "How did you hear about us?" That's going to be the best way to tell them that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Day 2, but round 3 of the NFL draft, and sort of in this second to third round range, the Bears can still find some guys to like. There's some different types of limitations, but there's some different sizes and flavors too at both cornerback and safety. Let's start with cornerback because there's a couple of fun guys in this range. How about first Kobe Bryant? Yes, that's, if you're not following the NFL draft, that is his name. He is named after the late NBA superstar Kobe Bryant. But Kobe Bryant at Cincinnati, the cornerback, in that defense, he was teammates with Sauce Gardner, and like Sauce Gardner was sort of like the Prince Amukamara, but better, but like the press on the line of scrimmage guy. And Kobe Bryant was the Kyle Fuller, like off the line of scrimmage. But Kobe had ball skills for days. Turnover, I think he had 15 turnovers. Like he had some crazy amount of interceptions and like 5 forced fumbles. Just like a really good feel for playmaking, going up and getting it, kind of giving him some of that space, baiting the quarterback, and then stepping up, going up and getting it. Absolutely. Sometimes he could be too aggressive, and that's, he take some chances and bite on some things and get burned for it. Like that's part of why he's down in this potential like late second to third round type range. But he has a pretty good feel for that off coverage in zone and being able to see it. Not that he's a direct one-to-one comparison to Kyle Fuller, but just think that type of role. He's a little bit stiff, and he's kind of an average athlete in terms of height, weight, speed. And so there's some question of like, okay, that average athleticism worked at Cincinnati to be that type of playmaker. But if all the receivers are a little bit faster in the NFL and the quarterbacks throw the ball better, will he still be able to generate as much playmaking as a more of an average athlete? Or how much of that is athletics based versus instincts and smarts and reading the coverage correctly? Some questions about how well that's going to translate for Kobe Bryant. But I still think he's going to be potentially a really fun NFL player to see where he and Sauce Gardner kind of go throughout the rest of their careers. Kind of opposite side of the size spectrum from some of the bigger guys we talked about earlier. Marcus Jones from Houston is 5'8", 175, absolutely tiny, but he might be, I don't think I even have to say might, he is the best return man in this draft. I mean, he was college football's leading returner, bunch of punt return and kickoff return touchdowns. I'm not going to say he is like Devin Hester, but undersized cornerback who's a great return guy. I mean, 5'8", 175 is much smaller than Hester was, right? That's why I'm not going to compare the two of them, but I just really want to see that explosiveness on someone's special teams in the NFL. Even on defense, though, like really smooth mover, like change of direction. As you can imagine, as a return guy, he can just sort of like knife his way through, and that translates to like trying to cover somebody, moving around, moving your hips, flipping and staying balanced underneath it. Does have pretty good ball skills as well, and for a tiny guy, is a physical tackler. You just wonder if at 175 pounds, can that hold up as an NFL slot cornerback? You're not going to be able to play him on the outside, certainly, but like how much can you add in terms of like strength and size there? He had 2 shoulder surgeries, one to each side, one in like December and one more recently. So he hasn't done any workouts this offseason, so we don't really know some of the numbers there. And there's some questions then like, is that 5'8", 175 part of the durability question mark there too? Is he just like too small and potentially then I mean, frail is a strong word, but you know what I mean? Like, does that set him up to not be reliably durable in the NFL? He's also a little bit of an older prospect, but like, if you just want to like draft an explosive slot cornerback who can instantly be a difference maker as a kickoff returner, third round feels like a pretty good spot for that, where if you feel comfortable in his ability to stay healthy and hold up physically as your slot cornerback, you're really going to get the best of both worlds there. And again, Marcus Jones is one of these players, like, regardless of who drafts him, I want to see how he returns balls in the NFL, and if he starts to make some special teams noise at the very least, if not get some playmaking going on someone's defense. One other quarterback in this range that I'll point out, Martin Emerson, kind of, again, back to the bigger side from Mississippi State. Long frame, like tall, lean, long arms, good length, and he's able to use that pretty well against receivers and kind of be physical up, downfield in those when they're on their breaks. Like when a receiver is going to make his break, he gets physical with them, and unfortunately has been too grabby doing so. And like you think like he could just use his length better without grabbing. You'd sort of like to see that evolution, but he's a tough guy. He's got really good feel for zone coverage with that length. He's just kind of limited as an athlete. He's big and long, but he's just not fast or sudden. And he's a little bit on the leaner side. He just doesn't have that bulk or that real strength. And the ball skills have been kind of limited too. So it's like he's got the length and some of the feel that coaches seem to like, but he's not the most dynamic athlete. So you just wonder what kind of ceiling that is for him. Does he have that? If he's not a big time playmaker, he just has some of the size and some of the skills. There might be a limited thing there, but you could very well have a solid starting cornerback for a while, just not a Pro Bowl big time difference maker. So that's why it falls more down into this type of range when the ceiling is a little bit limited there. If you want ceiling, the safety position has it for you in this third round. How about Nick Cross from Maryland? He's like 6'1" 215 pounds. So he's a thick safety with a lot of like strength and mass, but he ran a 4.3 4.40. I mean, he is fast and big. He can hit, but he's got great range. He's got good ball tracking in the air, takes great angles because he knows he has the speed to get there. So he can just kind of point A to point B, doesn't have to like take a roundabout way to catch up to the receiver. He can just go and get it. He has the tools, the speed and the size, at least the strength type size, the thickness, the mass at safety that you absolutely desire. Problem is he can be a little bit late to react to routes, and he's a big time like risk taker. And sometimes he's wrong, and he's wrong in big ways. And like a cornerback can get away with it a little bit more because they have the safety behind them to help. But if the safety makes the risk and is wrong, big play behind him, look out, last line of defense, right? Like he'll get caught looking sometimes. His eyes are not consistent, and quarterbacks can kind of manipulate him because, again, he's trying to take those risks so he can get looked off and kind of overcommit to one side, and then the quarterback can find space where he was supposed to be. So, like, he's raw. He needs some cleaning up in terms of the mental processing side and slowing things down a little bit, but he's so fast and strong at the same time that they could easily rise him up into the second round. He's just a little bit more raw than some of the other big, fast guys in this class, and the bites and the mistakes that he did make seem to be a little bit more consequential. And so the tools are there, but maybe more of a third round guy, maybe into the second. We'll see kind of how teams, what their risk tolerance is for a prospect like Nick Cross. And the last one I'll throw in here, the sort of the locally one, is Kirby Joseph from Illinois. Another one of these like inexperienced guys. He was a starter just his last season in college after like 3 years on the bench. And there's some questions that's like, he was so good this past season, but why did it take him 3 years to get in that lineup? A little bit inexperienced. He hasn't seen a lot, and so there's still some of that development process going in terms of knowing how to handle every route concept, and because he just hasn't faced everything, and doesn't have that wide breadth of experience behind him. Another one, a little bit on the leaner side, not all that strong, and really more of just a pure free safety because he's a smooth runner. He glides really cleanly off the back end, really good ball skills, seems to otherwise read the field pretty well from what he's been asked to do, tracks the ball pretty well in the air. Classic free safety that has some real upside there, but just needs more experience, needs more time, and is never going to be that in-the-box, physical type, versatile guy. He's a back-end deep safety, would be a fun pair in a two-deep zone scheme like what the Chicago Bears have. So we got some big-bodied, strong safeties. We got some athletic, smooth, free safeties. We got some big, long, strong, fast cornerbacks that are raw. We got some limited athletes that really have a high floor. You got your whole variety of defensive backs available for the Bears on the second and third days of the draft. They can find some kind of starting caliber player somewhere in there with one of those picks, whether they trade down or stay there, however they want to do it. Defensive backs will be available. I hope the breakdown helps you get feeling a little bit more prepared for this upcoming draft, getting to know the draft class a little bit more, because coming up on draft week, we are going to have, first of all, the Peacock and Williamson show are doing a Locked On NFL mock draft special leading up to the first pick in the week up. And then during the NFL draft, starting Thursday night, April 28th, we're going to do a Locked On NFL draft live coverage of the draft with all 3 days, real-time analysis from all of our local hosts. I'll be chiming in on when the Bears pick, coming on live on the live show there. So it's a lot of fun draft events coming up later on today. So I hope, or later on in the month and later on this week, or I guess next week and then the week after. But so lots to stick around for. I hope you'll hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. I hope our draft coverage of prospects for the Bears is making it just a little bit easier for you to bear down.